Welcome to this explainer. Okay, today we are diving headfirst into the fascinating life cycle of the Indian Home Rule movement. We're going to unpack its dramatic rise, its absolute peak, and its eventual fall. If you want to understand how the modern political infrastructure was truly forged in India, you are definitely in the right place. Let's see how this incredible story unfolds. Here is our roadmap for today. First, the spark of the movement. Second, 2 leaders, 2 leagues. Third, demands and peak momentum. Fourth, the empire strikes back. And fifth, decline and lasting impact. All right, Section 1, the spark of the movement. So picture the early 1900s. It was a period of massive frustration. The 1909 Morley-Minto reforms, which were basically a set of highly underwhelming British political concessions, had left Indian leaders widely dissatisfied. On top of that, the political landscape was completely fractured following the Congress split in Surat back in 1907. That split actually led to the fierce nationalist Gangadhar Tilak being locked up in prison from 1908 to 1914. But that last date is absolutely key. You see, Tilak's release perfectly coincided with a world-changing event, the outbreak of the First World War. The political landscape he returned to was completely altered, and the stage was set for something totally new. And enter Annie Besant. She was an Irish socialist, a brilliant orator, and a volunteer for the Theosophical Society, which was a mystic and philosophical organization. She had arrived in India in 1893, and she had an immediate, very strategic reaction to the outbreak of the war. She said, "England's need is India's opportunity." Wow. She realized right then and there that this global conflict was a massive lever for Indian political demands. But this global conflict also forced a huge strategic dilemma upon Indian politicians. Do we support the British war effort, or do we resist? Well, Tilak, freshly out of prison and looking to secure readmission into the Congress for his extremist faction, those were the folks demanding radical self-rule, made a highly calculated move. To conciliate the moderates who preferred working gradually within the British system, and to prove his good faith while staving off immediate government repression, he publicly declared his loyalty to the British government. It was basically a strategic pause before the real work began. Moving on to Section 2. 2 leaders, 2 leagues. Now, getting a unified movement off the ground wasn't easy. The path was heavily blocked by bureaucratic hurdles. At the 1914 Congress session, the extremists were denied entry, heavily due to the opposition of the powerful moderate leader, Swaraj Mehta. But Annie Besant was completely undeterred. In early 1915, she cleverly launched 2 newspapers, New India and Commonweal, to mobilize public opinion while she waited. Finally, in December 1915, with Mehta having passed away, the extremists were readmitted. However, Congress still blocked the immediate formation of a Home Rule League. They only agreed to an educational program with a strict deadline of September 1916 for any further action. This is where we see some real strategic brilliance in how they responded to that delay. Tilak, who wasn't bound by Besant's promises to the Congress, just moved preemptively. He launched his Indian Home Rule League in April 1916, carefully targeting Maharashtra, Karnataka, Berar, and the central provinces. Besant, playing by the rules, waited for the Congress deadline to expire before launching her league in September 1916 to cover the entire rest of the country. And she had the help of organizers like George Arndale and B.W. Wadia. They didn't compete against each other at all. They literally divided and conquered. And let me tell you, this dual league strategy was wildly successful. The movement became a magnet for the brightest political minds and heavyweights of the era. We're talking figures like Motilal Nehru, Chittaranjan Das, Muhammad Ali Jinnah, and Tej Bahadur Sapru flocking to the leagues. It wasn't just a fringe movement anymore. It was the beating heart of Indian political ambition. Section 3, demands and peak momentum. So what were they actually fighting for? The ideological backbone of the movement was crucial. They wanted self-government, absolutely, but they also focused heavily on political education, building the confidence to speak up against oppression. And importantly, they wanted to draw borders based on linguistic states and provide education in local languages. Because this core demand for home rule was explicitly secular, it successfully drew in countless moderate congressmen who were getting really frustrated with their own party's recent inactivity. The movement also had these really sharp, progressive social reform edges. Look at this quote from Tilak. He boldly declared, "If a god were to tolerate untouchability, I would not recognize him as God at all." That's powerful.
It shows that the vision for home rule wasn't just about swapping out British administrators for Indian ones, it was about fundamentally reforming and modernizing Indian society from the inside out.
So just how big did this get? The sheer scale of their success is pretty much captured by this one number, 40,000. That is the estimated official combined membership of the two leagues. Now, to put that into perspective, earlier political efforts usually only met for a few days a year during annual sessions. But these 40,000 members, they were functioning, organizing, and agitating year-round. It was an absolutely unprecedented level of sustained political mobilization.
All this massive momentum climaxed at the 1916 Lucknow session. Home Rule members absolutely dominated the proceedings there. As Tilak brilliantly noted, and you can see it in his words here, when fighting a third party, standing united is paramount. This energy successfully forged the historic Lucknow Pact, which was a joint demand for self-rule by both the Congress and the Muslim League. The Home Rule movement had, for the moment, effectively united the heavily fractured Indian political landscape.
All right, Section 4, the Empire Strikes Back. Now, the British government obviously didn't just sit back and watch this happen. They utilized a dual approach. First, they tried heavy-handed repression. They banned students from meetings and, crucially, they arrested Annie Besant in June 1917. But this completely backfired on them. It sparked nationwide protests and actually drove even more moderates right into the arms of the League. Realizing they'd made a massive mistake, the British quickly pivoted to conciliation, leading to the historic Montague Declaration. Just to give you an idea of how intensely the public reacted to that initial government repression, consider this incredible anecdote. Sir S. Subramania Iyer, a deeply respected figure known as the Grand Old Man of South India, officially renounced his knighthood in direct protest of Annie Besant's arrest. I mean, that was a massive public relations disaster for the British Empire, and it really highlighted the unbreakable solidarity of the movement. So the resulting Montague Declaration on August 20th, 1917, just changed the game entirely. It formally promised the gradual development of self-governing institutions. This effectively legalized the demand for home rule. It could no longer be treated as a seditious act. Annie Besant was released in September, and riding this massive wave of absolute peak popularity, she was elected president of the Congress in December 1917.
Finally, Section 5, Decline and Lasting Impact. Okay, so with all that momentum, why did it start to fall apart? Well, despite its success, the movement had critical internal flaws. It remained largely restricted to the educated classes and college students. It failed to gain broad traction among Muslims, Anglo-Indians, and non-Brahmins in southern India, who actually feared that home rule would just lead to an oppressive, upper-caste Hindu monopoly on power. On top of that, external factors were eroding their base. A lot of the moderates were simply pacified by the British promises of reform, and Annie Besant herself began oscillating back and forth on whether to accept the government's concessions. But the final blow really was a sudden leadership void. In September 1918, Tilak traveled all the way to England to pursue a libel case against a British journalist named Valentine Chirol, who had famously labeled him the father of Indian unrest. Tilak ultimately lost the case, but honestly, the bigger loss was that his prolonged absence from India, combined with Besant's political vacillation, meant there was no one left to effectively steer the ship. The movement just sort of fizzled out. Now, you might be thinking this was all a failure. Actually, scratch that. We really need to look at this as a successful failure. Despite dissolving, the Home Rule movement permanently upgraded the infrastructure of Indian politics. It established year-round political functioning. It proved that unity between the moderates, extremists, and the Muslim League was totally possible, even if it was brief. It expanded political consciousness into entirely new geographic regions, and it directly forced the hand of the British to issue those 1917 reforms. And let's see how this built the foundation for the next era. The organizational scaffolding that Tilak and Besant built didn't just vanish, it was inherited. Following the First World War, as Mahatma Gandhi emerged as a true leader of the masses, the All India Home Rule League simply transformed. In 1921, it officially changed its name to Swaraj, handing over its year-round operational model directly into Gandhi's upcoming mass movements. Which leaves us with this final thought to ponder today. Can a movement truly be considered a failure if it sets the stage for a nation's ultimate freedom? Thank you so much for joining me to explore the Indian Home Rule movement in this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll catch you next time.